It's quite a good plot line, isn't it? The Speaker of the House of Commons goes to the British Virgin Islands, gets a tip-off.
I passed this on to the Metropolitan Police.
Hoyle was in the British Virgin Islands and was told that Peter Mandelson was planning to move there.
The statement came that he was cooperating, that he'd only been arrested because of this tip-off, which wasn't true. I know that came from Peter Mandelson's lawyers, but it looked to a lot of people like this is Peter Mandelson up to his old tricks, trying to spin his way out of a reputational car crash.
The question is, can Starmer live down the humiliation of appointing him? I do think this by-election, were he to win, that would be probably the most important result in his entire career, and it would save him.
Hello, welcome to Talking Politics. I'm Tom Bradby.
And I'm Robert Paston.
And today we're going to be talking about whether the Mandelson crisis is the biggest political scandal for 50 years. Peter Mandelson's lawyers were saying that he was only arrested because the police were briefed that Peter Mandelson was about to flee the country. Not true, they said, but who could possibly have told the police?
I passed this on to the Metropolitan Police in good faith, as is my duty and responsibility.
Now, if you're listening rather than watching, that was Lindsay Hoyle, the Commons Speaker, admitting that he had indeed talked to the police. But I still feel this needs some explaining, Robert.
Yeah, so I think, look, the first thing we should point out is that Peter Mandelson's lawyers have insisted he had no plan to flee the country. And, you know, they're saying on his behalf that his overriding aim is to cooperate with the police and clear his name. But the background is that after he was arrested on Monday afternoon, he went to Wandsworth Police Station where he was told, I understand, that the person who warned the Met Police that he was a flight risk was the Speaker of the House of Lords. And I'm told that Mishkon's Mandelson's solicitor probed the police on this and were assured that it was the Speaker of the House of Lords. The Speaker of the House of Lords then put out a statement saying, wasn't me Gov, I didn't contact the Met. So it was all very messy and very weird. But we now know that it was the Speaker of the House of Commons who warned the Met that he'd heard that Peter Mandelson was a flight risk. And the background is very odd in that it turns out that Speaker Hoyle was in the British Virgin Islands a few days ago and was told by somebody locally in the British Virgin Islands that this person had heard that Peter Mandelson was planning to move there, and Hoyle felt it was his duty to pass this information to the Met. I mean, everything about this story is, I'm choosing my words carefully, unusual in inverted commas. It's certainly the first time. I mean, you and I write thrillers. It's quite a good plot line, isn't it? The Speaker of the House of Commons goes to the British Virgin Islands, gets a tip-off that, you know, one of the most famous people of all time in his own party is planning to flee. I mean, it's all extraordinary.
I mean, here's what I thought when this played out. I know the statement came that he was cooperating, that he'd only been arrested because of this tip-off, which wasn't true, etc., as you just said. I know that came from Peter Mandelson's lawyers. I've spoken to various people who are close to Mandelson within the Labour Party, cabinet ministers, former cabinet ministers. The overall feedback I get is that they are, A, horrified by what's come out about all this, to state the obvious, but B, that they don't think and don't get the impression that Peter Mandelson realises just how bad this is and how big a hole it is. And that I think they felt, and probably I felt, that the lawyer's statement looked a bit like, and this is a bit unfair, I guess, because his lawyers are merely trying to, portray things accurately. But it looked to a lot of people like this is Peter Mandelson up to his old tricks, trying to spin his way out of a reputational car crash. And, regardless really of how this plays out and the whole question of whether he was only arrested because of this tip-off about fleeing to the British Virgin Islands, which he wasn't going to do, I sort of feel that goes over the heads of a lot of people And what they really see is a man whose conduct in public office is just sort of horrific to them. You know, we don't know whether he says he denies all wrongdoing. We don't know whether he's going to be charged. We definitely don't know whether he's going to be convicted. We don't know whether he's going to go to prison. We don't know any of these things. That will all be determined. And as I said, he obviously denies it. But the plain fact is that we can see here he was in very senior government positions, sharing apparently market-sensitive information with a leading financier. And I think a lot of his former colleagues find that incomprehensible and horrifying. And the kind of what many people might see as the fine details about when he was arrested and why he was arrested is entirely beside the point to them. Do you agree, or do you think, no, you know, it probably made sense from his point of view to try and clear this up?
Look, the revelations in recent weeks and months about Mandelson's close friendship with the convicted paedophile and sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein was damaging enough for his reputation, and there was terrible contagion to the reputation of the Labour Party and the Prime Minister. When I saw on Monday afternoon the pictures of Mandelson being arrested, and then the following morning, him being, returning home at sort of 2 a.m, my overriding view was that these would be, and this is terrible for Keir Starmer, these would be the images that would define.
Well, it was unbelievable to see it, wasn't it? I mean, how much we expected it. It was like, wow.
Yeah, it was a very shocking moment. I mean, one should, Mandelson, to an extent, is the British Labour Party. His grandfather, Herbert Morrison, was, one of the biggest figures in the post-war Attlee government. Mandelson has devoted his life to, in a sense, honouring his ancestor. He was absolutely central to the creation of New Labour, along with Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, and that landslide victory in 97. This would always have been profoundly damaging and shocking for the Labour Party, his arrest. It is all the more damaging and shocking for members of the party because Keir Starmer appointed him as his ambassador, as I've said many times, arguably at the time one of the most important jobs, top 2 or 3 jobs within the whole government, ambassador to America at the start of the Trump presidency. And so Starmer, with that act, made what was a bit of, an issue about rethinking Labour's past into an issue about rethinking Labour today. It became an issue, absolutely fundamental issue about Keir Starmer's judgment. So, just as those images of the parties in Downing Street during COVID and that film that we obtained and showed of the sort of phony press conference joking about parties became the sort of defining images of the Boris Johnson government, this is going to hang around the neck of the Labour leader like an albatross. It's a really big problem.
Somebody came up to me at the weekend, nothing to do with politics, just a viewer walked up to me and started talking about this and said, is this the worst political scandal for 50 years? And I said, well, I don't think so. And then I thought, well, maybe we should interrogate that. What's worse? Well, he's not the only minister or former minister to be arrested. Jonathan Aitken, once very close to Margaret Thatcher, later arrested, found guilty for perjury, sent to prison. And there have been others. And we should be careful that we don't fall down the rabbit hole of saying that Mandelson's guilty, because he very clearly says he isn't. His lawyers say he isn't. They say he will clear his name.
But we have got, we're not going to go into the detail of it because he's been arrested. But, we have got evidence of improper communication between him about government information and the convicted paedophile and sex trafficker Epstein.
And I found myself on the way in on Monday, having thought about this conversation at the weekend, thinking, and obviously it'll take time to play out, and there are big ifs in this, but if he is charged, and if he is convicted, and if he is sent to prison, 3 big ifs, but if he was, I thought to myself, Keir Starmer won't survive that. He won't survive that, will he?
Well, I mean, there's a big question of whether Keir Starmer will still be leader at the time all of that plays out, because this is going to play out over
some years,
over months and possibly years. But it's it's certainly going to be months till we know whether or not he's going to be.
But even a charge would be incredibly toxic for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, impossible a position for I think at that point. But as I say, there are other pressures on the Prime Minister even now.
How do you pitch it as a scale of scandal? I mean, where do you place it? I mean, we don't need to go into the history of political scandals, from Jeremy Thorpe to Jonathan Aitken to whoever else you want to put into all the cash for honours and the cash for questions in the John Major era and the endless sex scandals of the John Major. I mean, there'd be many, many, many political scandals. But I just found it hard to think of a figure as significant in the history of British politics as Peter Mandelson potentially being accused of such serious things. I found it quite hard to find an equal.
Well, certainly it's quite difficult to find somebody as central to British political life for so long facing these sorts of allegations. But you're right that, just because it's impossible to think of British politics over the last 30 years absent Peter Mandelson, right? That's why it is so huge, because he was part of the British establishment for so long, and it's why Epstein cultivated him, why Epstein found him so useful, because, like Prince Andrew, these were both individuals of enormous influence with enormous networks of useful contacts, and that's why, they were so valuable to this horrible, paedophile.
We're going to go on and talk about the by-election that's coming up this week, and the question of how much this does or doesn't influence it, and how we think that by-election is going to play out, because it's intriguing of its own lights. It seems to me that this is one of these scandals, and I think you were implying this when you compared it to Partygate and that Allegra Stratton video of them apparently laughing. But I remember at sort of 5 p.m. that afternoon we ran that story, being told we had the video and going down and watching it in an edit suite and just being utterly gobsmacked by it. I mean, finding it impossible to believe what I was seeing. And we had a little conversation, and I just said, listen, I think by the end of this week, every single person in the country will have seen that video. It will have 100% cut through, and everyone will be enraged. And I think that's pretty much what happened. I feel like this is approaching the same levels of cut throughs. How do you define the scale of the Mandelson crisis, and particularly the nature of its cut through?
Look, I'm sure anybody who's even half interested in politics and half awake will already have seen the pictures and the film of Mandelson being arrested. So I cut through
100%
is huge. Now, I mean, the question is, can Starmer live down the humiliation of appointing him? As and when the police allow him to release the documents showing what questions were asked, by Starmer's then aide, then Chief of Staff Morgan McSweeney, who's resigned over, his role in the appointment of Mandelson. When we finally see the 3 questions that Morgan McSweeney asked Mandelson about his relationship with Epstein, will people feel a bit more sympathy towards Starmer, that when, if they show that Mandelson, significantly misled the Prime Minister, will people say, okay, it's sort of understandable that he was appointed. I doubt that that's what the reaction will be, because, it's known that, very, very large numbers of people were telling the Prime Minister, whether it was about Epstein or about other aspects of, Mandelson's career or personality, that there were huge risks. And I did say it's an enormously high-risk appointment, and there's a very good chance that if he appoints Mandelson, it will end in tears.
So what you're saying is, and we don't know that this is the case, and obviously I don't want to accuse Peter Mandelson of something that we have no idea he's guilty of, but just in terms of what it would take to clear Keir Starmer, in effect, or not clear him, but to get him out of this crisis, it would be Peter Mandelson being on record as downplaying his post-Epstein conviction relationship to, I met him twice, kind of in passing. It would be that level of effect.
I don't think that does let Starmer off the hook, because even so, there was evidence that Mandelson, even if it wasn't a close relationship, Mandelson maintained a relationship with Epstein after he was convicted of soliciting a child for prostitution. And, most people would say the Prime Minister should have just looked at that fact, not even bother to ask Mandelson the question about what kind of relationship was it, and just said, that is, it is wholly improper to appoint somebody whose judgment is so bad in that sense.
Let's talk about the by-election, and let's talk about the constituency itself and the extent, and we're about to talk about this fascinating potential three-way split. But to begin with, maybe you could set the scene on the constituency.
Well, it's a very divided constituency. It's got a white working class area. It's got a very strongly Asian area. But, for me, the most important fact about Gorton and Denton is it is Labour heartland. In more than 100 years, Labour has lost this seat just once. This is not a seat that in any normal circumstances, Labour should be contemplating losing, and yet that is a very real possibility.
And yet you've got this potential, according to opinion polls, three-way split between the Greens and Reform and Labour.
Well, that's right. And in a way, it's a sort of microcosm of what we're seeing in British politics altogether, which is this extraordinary, unprecedented fragmentation of the British vote, the end of the kind of tribalism between, where voters were broadly either Labour or Tory. That is gone, and possibly gone forever. But the thing that is literally doing my head in a sense, only because I've just been in this business for far too long, is that you could have the kind of volatility in terms of people's affiliations where a party, the Greens, who actually until the last general election really weren't a factor really in British politics at all, and have never been a factor in Gorton and Denton, now, according to opinion polls, getting the same kind of vote share in terms of what people are telling the pollsters as Labour and indeed as Reform. We're all completely used to the Reform surge. What is really fascinating is the kind of Green surge that we appear to be seeing in a constituency that one would never associate with the Greens.
Obviously, to comply with electoral law, we need to make clear that if you want to know the full list of candidates, please go and have a look in the show notes, because, of course, there are plenty of other candidates for this other than the ones that we're going to focus on in this conversation. I also feel that one of the besetting sins of political journalists is the overinterpretation of by-election results. They very frequently turn out to be not telling you very much about very much. But that caveat aside, this does seem kind of fascinating. Keir Starmer has been there. It's being interpreted by some as an indication that Labour think they have a decent chance of winning it and are trying to push it over the line. Whether Keir Starmer being there helps or hinders them is perhaps a different question. I think if Labour did win, it would do a great deal to stabilise his premiership. It is an intriguing, the idea that the Greens are up in contention is fascinating. What are you thinking about it?
Given that the Greens are well to the left of Labour, were the Greens to be the decisive factor in some shape or form in this election, either winning or taking so many votes from Labour that Reform were to win, at that point, you know, in a policy-making sense, that has got to cause huge questions for Labour about whether the way that they positioned themselves, some would, you know, many would say to the right, was the right kind of positioning. For Keir Starmer personally, if Labour loses, and if, as apparently the polls indicate, there's a theoretical chance that Labour were to come third, these are all ifs, right? Because we, you know, I actually struggle to believe that Starmer could survive that. And the reason is because he blocked Andy Burnham from running. And there are plenty of people who think this would be a totally different contest for Labour if Burnham were running in Gorton. So if Labour loses, and if two parties were to do better than Labour in Gorton and Denton, I actually think it's I think it's a really difficult moment for Starmer. Now, this is not a forecast. What we're doing is just gaming different outcomes. And as you say, were he to win, I mean, despite the fact it's a safe Labour seat, right? That would be probably the most important result in his entire career, and it would save him, right? So, so it's hard, you know, it seems weird to talk about one by-election, right, as being so important, but I do think this by-election is massive for them. Massive.
Well, I think one of the outcomes might be Keir Starmer being in trouble, but the other outcome would be us as the media suddenly saying, given how volatile we know things are, well, yeah, we've got to think about Reform because maybe they are one of the political parties of the future, but we've also got to think about the Greens, and suddenly the avalanche of coverage that would descend on them, I think, if they won. But even if they came a close second, don't you think it would really change the dial?
I think the dial has already changed, Tom. Polanski has done an extraordinary job. I mean, and it is not even an MP, right? But he has given the Greens just astonishing momentum. The fact that if you just look at national opinion polls, there are, you know, three parties nestling in that sort of 14, 15 to 20% vote share, with Reform significantly above them, depending on how you measure it, 8 or 9 percentage points ahead. You know, this is, you know, we are in for, you know, so I mean, obviously in Scotland, you know, SNP doing incredibly well, but it's a smaller nation. So, you know, if we're just looking at vote shares within England, it's a four-way. It's a four-way contest, the kind of fragmentation that none of us have ever lived through. I mean, there was a poll, I think, yesterday showing that the SNP may well be on course to get a clear majority in May in the Scottish parliamentary elections. The first time they've done that in years and years and years. They did it under Alex Salmond, the late. Were that to happen, that's another event that I think, you know, Starmer would struggle to survive if he survives that long. You know, I've said this before, so apologies if you're listening to this and you've heard me say this before. You know, because we're all obsessed with, you know, who will be the Prime Minister after May, we do, I think, underplay what could be an extraordinary phenomenon. Which is, it is theoretically possible, and actually more than theoretically possible, some would say it's likely, that after May we will have, you know, in Northern Ireland, Sinn Féin is the lead party. They want Northern Ireland to be part of the Republic of Ireland. We could, you know, SNP are almost certainly going to win. If they get a clear majority, that gives momentum back towards independence for Scotland. And if Plaid Cymru are the biggest party in Wales, not only is that devastating for Labour, that has basically felt, Wales was a sort of Labour property, devastating for Labour. But and although Sinn Féin are not going into these elections saying independence now, they are still a nationalist party who, in theory, believe in independence for Wales. So this fracturing of the UK, it becomes way more real. It is extraordinary.
Well, stick with us. It's making, we're potentially certainly in England, four-way split territory, and as Robert was just saying, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland all got their different dynamics. It does make our job fascinating, so stick with us on Talking Politics. But for now, from me, it's goodbye.
And goodbye from me.